Welcome to the Savvy Sauce, where we have practical chats for intentional living. I'm your host, Laura Duggar, and I'm so glad you're here. I want to say a huge thank you to today's sponsors for this episode, Chick-fil-A East Peoria and Savvy Sauce Charities. Are you interested in a free college education for you or someone you know? Stay tuned for details coming later in this episode from today's sponsor, Chick-fil-A East Peoria. You can also visit their website today at chickfil-a.com/East Peoria. I'm so excited to share a special Patreon re-release episode. And if you've been with the Savvy Sauce for a while, you know that we used to make some money by having people sign up for Patreon. And as a reward, they would get access to special episodes. Now we have done away with that as we've transitioned to becoming a nonprofit. And we want to make all of these episodes available to you. So we re-release a few every year. What I'd love to ask is, as we're approaching the end of the year, because we've taken out that revenue stream, would you consider financially supporting the Savvy Sauce charities? There are two simple ways. First, if you want to mail us a check, that saves us all of the processing fees, and you can make that out to Savvy Sauce Charities and mail it to P.O. Box 101, Roanoke, Illinois 61561. Also, if you want to go online, visit thesavvysauce.com and you can type in different words to the search button. You could type in donate or support, and it should take you to the place where there's a button to click and put in your credit card information and give that way. We would be so grateful for any amount, and we love our partnership with you. Here's our chat. Stacey Morgan is my guest today, and you may have heard her name in the news over the past few years. She has documented her story in her debut book, The Astronaut's Wife: How Launching My Husband into Outer Space Changed the Way I Live on Earth. And now she's going to share more about that season and all the lessons God taught her about making the most of her one incredible life. And she's going to inspire each of us to do the same. Here's our chat. Welcome to the Savvy Sauce, Stacey.
I am so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, it is truly my pleasure. And will you just start by giving us a little bit more context for our time together and just share a few things about yourself?
Sure. Well, hi, my name is Stacey. I currently live in Texas. I have 4 kids. I'm married to a guy named Drew who has kind of an unusual job, but I grew up in a small town just outside of Boston and was kind of a scholar athlete growing up, interested in a lot of different things, but always involved in church and youth group. And that really served me well when I went off to college. The first college I went to West Point, and actually I'll tell you in a minute, but that is where I eventually met my now husband, Drew. We got married after I graduated from undergrad. He's a little bit older than me, and he is an Army officer. And so we have moved all over the country. We've lived on both coasts and had a number of kind of unusual situations, just, kind of typical for a military family, living all over the place. And I've had a lot of crazy jobs. I think mainly I have an unusual story because I'm real quick to say yes to things, which sometimes, it's a double-edged sword. Sometimes you say yes and you realize, oh, I should have thought through that a little bit more. But really, it's been quite an adventure because we have had the opportunity to live a lot of different places, experience a lot of different things. And we ended up here in 2013. We can kind of get into that if you want, but we ended up down here in Texas when my husband, who is still an Army officer, but he became a NASA astronaut. And so that totally changed the direction of our lives in kind of changing all the plans we had for what we were supposed to be doing in the military and ending up down here at Johnson Space Center, and then him eventually launching into outer space.
Wow, there are so many points to unpack, but let's back it up to what you had mentioned about West Point. So will you just elaborate and tell us more about how you and Drew met and fall in love?
Sure. So we were both cadets at West Point when we met. He was a little bit older than me, but we met through Officers Christian Fellowship, which is a Christian club that is very popular on military bases, both at the academies, but in big army and all the services as well. When you get out, it's like small groups, typical for what most people would, find comfortable in kind of church community. And so we met there, and we just kind of clicked. I would say it's funny looking back, we were not the type of people I think we would have thought we would marry. He was far more serious than I am. I'm a little bit more, definitely, I'm one to more kind of like walk the fine line than he is. But we work together really well. We've always been a great team. That's always been a real theme in our marriage, that we are a team. And, when he proposed after I graduated from undergrad, he kind of said, I promise you a life of adventure, which at the time sounded wonderful and adorable. Of course, it has come back to haunt me several times when he has then, come up with some crazy plan. And when I hesitate, he's like, I promised you adventure. And I'm like, now that's unfair. I did not know when you said adventure back in 2000 that you meant, all of these crazy things like going to space or all these different deployments and all this kind of stuff like that. So we now have 4 kids. We've been married this summer will be 22 years. And, it hasn't been without its challenges like any marriage. And certainly, any marriage under stress because of stressful situations, whether that's military deployments, whether that's space travel, or just kind of life and parenting. And as you kind of grow up together and get to know each other and the world changes around you, we've certainly had ups and downs, but we are a team. And I think God has really honored that. And it's been really helpful for us when we've had those sticky seasons where you just feel like, man, we are just not connecting or kind of jiving the way we would want, to actually say to each other, like, we are on the same team. And that has been really helpful.
The part of your story that involves space travel is one that most of us will never be able to relate to experientially, but it's still extraordinary. So can you walk us through the detailed events leading up to 9:28 p.m. on July 20th, 2019?
Sure. So I should back it up one big step behind that just to give everybody a little context. So in 2012, we were kind of living our lives. We had always been deep into the Army Special Operations community. We love that. In order to live and kind of thrive in that environment, you have to be all in. And we were all in. And one day my husband came home. He was uncharacteristically giddy. And he said, "You're not going to believe this huge news. NASA is opening up the application window for a new class of astronauts." And I thought, why are you telling me this? This has no bearing whatsoever on our lives. We are on this path, and that is a completely different path. And he said, "Well, I want to apply." And I thought to myself, well, I wanted to be a ballerina at one point in life, but that ship sailed. Like, who doesn't say they always wanted to be an astronaut? Like, this seems like a childhood fantasy. But he said, "No, I just want to apply. Like, don't worry. All of our plans are going to stay the same. They've never selected an Army physician before. I just, I want to," the joke was that you'll always be a NASA applicant, right? And that'll be great. We'll all, laugh about it at family Christmases and stuff. Except he kept making it through every gate. And so in 2013, we got the call that completely took our life off of one set of train tracks and put it on another. At that time, we were currently stationed just outside of Washington, D.C. at Fort Belvoir. And we were supposed to be literally the next week moving to Germany. And that's how close these changes kind of came up on themselves. And so we had to unravel everything for Germany and move to Houston, Texas, because that's where Johnson Space Center is. And so he began his training in 2013. I started my journey in learning a whole new culture, a whole new way of doing life. I'd never lived in a place that was at least not near a military base or within a military community. Didn't quite recognize at the time how much that shared sense of community had made things easier in terms of connecting with people before that and when I didn't have it. So it was probably our rockiest transition for me personally that I'd ever had in terms of friendships and getting connected. That's a big part of my story because I think friendship struggles are so common for adult women. It's just something that nobody really teaches us how to do. And so a lot of women are very lonely. But fast forward, he trained for several years until it was eventually his turn to fly. And in 2019, the only way to get to the International Space Station was to fly on a Russian Soyuz rocket. So some people are very confused because they think, well, every space movie I've ever watched is taking place in Florida, right? Whether that's Apollo 13 or Armageddon or whatever, why didn't he launch from Florida? Well, between 2011 and 2020, the space shuttle program had ended. SpaceX Crew Dragon had not yet started launching from Florida again. So for about a 10-year period, the only way to get to and from the International Space Station was to ride a Russian rocket. So that's what NASA did. They went into partnership with the Russians, which of course makes things very interesting given today's kind of current political climate and all the world events. But that meant when it was Drew's turn to launch, we as a family had to travel to Kazakhstan, which is a country that I could not spell before 2019. And so if you don't know where that is, don't feel bad. I didn't either. I had to look it up. It's a former Soviet republic, really kind of in between Russia and Afghanistan. So it is in the middle of nowhere. And when the Soviets were building their space program in the 1950s and 60s, they built their secret space city there in Kazakhstan. That's where they started their space program, and they have kind of kept it unchanged, and they continue to launch their rockets from there today. It was a whole kind of world travel and cultural experience too, to take my 4 kids to Kazakhstan, which is a completely different cultural experience, for really what came down to a very stressful, very emotional moment, really waiting for that launch. So unlike Florida, which when you watch on television, it's colorful. There's a lot of people, a lot of spectators. Big people remember from the shuttle days, big countdown clock. A loudspeaker kind of telling everybody what's going on. That's not how it is in Kazakhstan. So about 30 minutes before the launch, the kids and I were brought to this viewing area. And by viewing area, I would say big field. It's not, there was kind of some grandstands area far at the other end of the field, but that's where all the space tourists stand and the press and all that kind of stuff. And we didn't want to be near them. So our escort brought us down to the other end of the field, and it's just dark. And it's quiet and there's no announcements. There's no countdown clock. It's just looking at your watch or your phone there, just kind of in the dark. And you just know that Russian ground crew is going to launch that rocket at exactly 9:28 p.m., not a minute earlier, not a minute later. And so standing there in the dark, holding my kids' hands, and we can see the rocket in the distance, only about a mile away, which by rocket launch standards is very close. Knowing that in a minute or 30 seconds or 10 seconds as it gets closer, it's either going to be one of the best days of your life, super exciting, super proud moment, or it's going to be the worst day of your life and you could become a widow. And as much as it's easy to kind of get complacent because incidents are so rare, but we all can remember any number of space disasters that have happened, Columbia, Challenger, those are very real. And with my time down here at Johnson Space Center, you come to learn those names and you meet those families and you meet those widows and widowers, and you realize that space travel is dangerous. At the end of the day, my husband was in a little tiny capsule on top of a rocket full of highly explosive fuel. So it's very scary. And in that moment, standing there thinking, in 10 seconds, my life is going to change. No matter what happens, even if this goes perfectly, what happens next? I don't really know. It's kind of like having a baby. You can read all about it and assume things will be the way they're going to be, but until you're in it and then it happens, like you don't really know how it's going to go. And so it was a really overwhelmingly emotional moment because you think this could go sideways. And also, by the way, the world is watching live with me. So if something goes wrong, I'm not able to process this privately, I will be experiencing it in real time with the rest of the world. But even if it goes perfectly, what happens next? Like, what does it look like to live on Earth with a spouse in space and single parent for 9+ months while their other parent is in space? And you really don't know. And it's scary to think, like, gosh, what if something happens? He can't like come home early. He can't just like a business trip, jump on a plane or a train and get home early. There's no coming back early. So whatever happens, I'm on my own. For better or worse, I'm on my own. And I hope I have the endurance and the support system and everything I'm going to need in order to be successful in this 9 months.
And my heart is pounding a little bit faster just as I hear you describe this. And I'd love to get back to your story, but first just to pause and wonder, with that mixture of this adventure right in front of you and then your experience of Army life.
Yeah.
How did God meet you in all of that to reveal your choice of you're able to choose hope or fear?
Right. So when you take the time to step back and think, sometimes you don't see these patterns in your life until you kind of start putting them down on paper. And it was interesting for me to see how God had prepared me for that moment with other moments, especially related to military deployments in the past. Because certainly experiencing a rocket launch and all that fear and kind of this moment of where is my hope found in this moment? That was a varsity level moment. But I'm so thankful that about 10 years earlier, God really started to prepare me for that moment with some other big moments, like when my husband deployed for the first time. I'll never forget. It was the height of the war on terror. So we were living in a military community, which was amazing. And a lot of my friends' husbands were also serving in the same military units or similar military units, and they were deploying. The tempo was high. So that meant 6 months deployed or longer, coming home for short amounts of time, and then deploying again. Lots of action, specifically in Afghanistan and Iraq at the time. And so lots of fatalities, lots of injuries, lots of grief, and for spouses, a lot of fear, because we knew what they were doing was very dangerous. And so for me and my friends, we kind of had this unspoken rule, which I think a lot of people can understand, which was, let's just not talk about this scariest thing, because somehow talking about it makes it seem more possible. And as crazy as that is to say, people get that. There's a lot of things we don't talk about because it's just too scary to think about. And so for us, the scariest thing in our life at that time was the fear that our husbands would not come home, that they would be killed in action. And that felt very real because we were going to memorial services. We were visiting people in the hospital. We were turning on the news and seeing what was going on in the world. And there was often communication blackouts because we knew that they were doing things that were very dangerous, very secretive. And so at the time, I happily did what everybody else was doing, which was, let's just not talk about it. Let's just kind of like live life managing. We felt like we were managing this fear. I think that's what I would have said at the time. But then one day, my friend Lisa, who's an amazing friend, and she's always like 2 steps ahead of me on the wisdom scale. And we were having coffee on her front porch, and she turned to me and she said, I've been thinking a lot about what life would be like if our husbands were killed. And this was like a bomb drop. I mean, because we just were not supposed to be talking about this. Like, here, the rest of us had been avoiding all morbid thoughts about what could possibly happen with our husband. And instead, she had turned and looked it straight in the eye. And I was shocked. And so I kind of sat up straighter and I said, well, what do you mean? And she said, well, I've been thinking about it. And it's not that, life would certainly be hard, and doesn't mean we wouldn't need counseling or our kids wouldn't need support, but life would still go on. Even if that happened, life would still go on. Life would still be full of good things, and God would provide and bring people around us to support us. And I've just been thinking about that. And I was stunned. I was absolutely stunned, because while the rest of us were too afraid to face that fear in looking at it, she kind of exposed it for what it was, which was certainly real and an absolute possibility that could happen. But when she started walking down the path of okay, if this happened, then what would happen? Then what would happen? you have to decide, do I believe God would really be with me or not? Do I believe his promises are true, that he will be with me on good days and bad days, and that he will draw people to me who will love me and support me? And have I plugged myself into friends and a faith community that would be there for me if that happened? And it was a game changer. That was probably one of, at the time, the biggest life-changing conversations I'd ever had as an adult, because it really did shift how I viewed feeling afraid about things like that. And so I had several opportunities. Drew deployed several times. And then certainly it doesn't take combat deployments to feel afraid like that. I know I have felt it before when my daughter was in the NICU, and I had to leave her in the NICU and go home at night. I know I have felt it during this pandemic several times. I know I'm going to feel it when I drop my oldest off at college this summer. This moment where it just, life feels very scary, mainly because of the unknowns that come next and the fact that you have no control over those. And so that rocket launch moment was, I felt like God was really prompting me in that moment to say, hey, if this rocket explodes, like, what will you do with that? Do you still trust me that I'm here with you and that I will still bring people to you and love you? Like, is your foundation and your hope truly found in me, or is it found in this rocket launch going successfully? Because it might not. And then what does that mean for you? And so it really was this choice of, am I going to choose to live a life of fear, which is our default? Because if you do not choose something else, we will always live a life dictated by fear of something. It's exhausting to live like that, because once you conquer one fear, another one's going to pop up, and then they come in bunches and they just start layering on top of each other. And honestly, it can lead to despair, because there's plenty of things in the world to be afraid of, and new ones just pop up every day. So instead, I felt like God was offering me a new way of living. And it really felt tangible in that moment of that rocket launch, which is, hey, I hope that you will choose to find your hope in me, just me, the one unchanging thing in this world that will be unchanging regardless of what happens with this rocket launch in 10 seconds. But if it goes well or if it goes poorly, I am unchanging. You can rely on me. I will be with you in the best and the worst of times. And even if the rocket launch goes successfully and whatever happens in the next 9 months, I'm with you there as well. So you don't need to be afraid, because I'm here with you. You can have hope that I will enable you to do what must be done, no matter what happens tomorrow.
And I'm so grateful that you chose hope and you chose faith. And then after all of that excitement and that adrenaline experienced on launch day, what did your life look like in the months to follow?
Yeah, it wasn't easy. I joke that those 9 months really were like, it was like a master class in all these little lessons I'd learned throughout the years, but I'd never had to put them into practice at this level and all at the same time. So things like being honest about that I needed help, that, there are times in the past where I have certainly wanted people to know or think that I had it all together and that I could do it all by myself. Especially, I think every mom feels that way. Certainly military spouses, we take a lot of pride in feeling like I'm doing this on my own. And I realize now that in certain seasons, I have made life a lot harder for myself, because I somehow thought that there was like an extra trophy if I finished the race by myself. And I realized that was really like spoiler, there's no trophy. And also I was just making it harder for myself. And so this season, I could not fake it. Like past seasons, I could fake it. This one, I could not fake it. I had 2 teenagers, 2 tweens, a lot of hormones and then prepubescent and puberty things flying around, just a lot of scheduling, a lot of driving, like just life. And then just the stress of living with someone who, a spouse who is living in space, and the stress of what does that do to your marriage, to parenting, parent-child relationships, just every single piece of running a house, of parenting, all the things was solely on my shoulders. And that's a big weight. And it was tough. It was tough. So I could not fake it. I had to ask for help. I had to be willing to ask for it and receive it, which are 2 different skill sets. I found it. Sometimes you get good at one and not the other. I had to get real willing to be vulnerable with my friends and say things like, I'm really lonely. Can like be honest, like everything's not just, oh, this is so exciting. Oh, isn't it so great? Aren't we just so proud of him? Yes. But at the same time, sometimes I'm lonely. Sometimes I'm struggling. Sometimes in my stress, I would overly focus on trying to control my home life or what was happening within my own house and become not as pleasant of a person to live with because I was just trying to kind of regain some control in what felt like a little bit of a chaotic world. And then you become not your best self and you know that. And so I had to learn how to kind of get out of that survival mode and still have fun even when life is hard and really just kind of accept that life isn't one thing or the other. You can be in a hard season and it still have good things in it. Life can be full of opportunities and challenges and one does not negate the other. And when you try to live your life by one narrative or the other, not only are you faking it, but you make life harder than it needs to be and you kind of block other people out of it. So there was a lot of learning going on in there, but it really all came down to that first decision of how am I going to live my life in this season? Am I going to live it fearfully, reactionary, hair trigger, just stressed all the time because I'm afraid of what comes next and I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to handle it? Or am I going to live a life of hope, which is of course like not wishes and dreams, but it is anticipation that God will be with me no matter what comes down the pipeline. And sometimes that's divine comfort that is hard to explain, but you just feel it. Sometimes it's people he draws to your life who literally will sit on the couch with you and just like hold your hand or give you a hug that moment you need it. Sometimes it's someone offering to carpool or take your kid out driving because they're trying to get their driver's license, But that's really the biggest thing for me. I talk about it in chapter 1 of the book because that's the foundation that really all those other lessons were built on.
And I think also with your book, it was helpful to hear little insights into what it looked like for your marriage. And it was even interesting when you said it's really important for astronauts to have forms of entertainment and that you were so committed to being involved in Drew's life and that you two still found ways to stay connected. I just think that has to be encouraging to any married couples listening right now because you clearly had a big barrier to overcome. But what were some of those ways that the two of you tried as best as you could in that season to stay intimately connected to one another's lives?
Yeah, it's not easy. And I think there's kind of this fallacy that is kind of dangerous for especially young marrieds, I think, to believe, which is like in every season of your life, you're going to feel amazingly connected to your spouse and you're going to constantly be growing in your relationship. And sometimes that's not true. Like sometimes one person has a job that takes them away from home, or someone is sick, or there are other issues going on in your life where the connection is just not as strong, not because you don't want it to be, but because the circumstances you find yourself in don't allow for that. And certainly while my husband was in space, there was a lot of challenges to feeling connected. I mean, there's good communication, but there's a difference between like quality and quantity, right? So he could call me on the phone every day, but because of the time differences and his schedule, the only time he could call me was between 4 and 5 p.m. my time, which as any person knows, as any kids, is like the worst time of the day. Like everything's happening. The wheels are coming off, homework, pickups, dinner prep, like all that kind of stuff was crazy. So needless to say, I was not able to sit down and have like a heartfelt, drawn out conversation. And then kids hate talking on the phone. So he wasn't really talking to them during the day. And my 8-year-old isn't going to send him an email. So, there wasn't like a lot of quality or quantity conversation with the kids, which of course puts a little stress on your marriage too, because you worry about that. And then we'd have one video chat a month and you want it to be fun. And you want it to kind of be good for the kids as well as him. But it's it was 1 hour to share between 5 people. And so that's not a lot of time. And so the reality is that for that season, there was a lot of, I would say, relationship treading water. And the goal is just not to let things go downhill, which you can easily do in life when you and your spouse are experiencing the same event, but from different points of view. And that's what we were doing. We were sharing the mission, but from two vastly different points of view. And so you do your best, but the difference is, I think you have to, in order to kind of come out on the other end better, you have to have a kind of a mutual commitment that, hey, we are eventually going to come back together on this. We can't change the circumstances. I can't make the time difference different. I can't give you more time on the phone. There's things I just cannot change, but we are committed as a team to doing the best we can right now. And when this circumstance changes, in this case, when he came home, we're going to kind of back up again and do some story sharing and reconnect about some things that we just didn't have the opportunity to in the past. And so it's a little bit of kind of like 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but eventually you still come out ahead if you are committed to trying to come back together and share those experiences in one way or another. Where you run into kind of danger is if people start experiencing 2 different things and then they never come back together. So the gap just kind of keeps widening and widening. And then you hear when people say like, yeah, I woke up and I felt like I was living a different life than the person who was sleeping next to me. And so reminding ourselves that we are a team, even though we were experiencing the same thing. I didn't know a lot about a lot of the things he was doing. He didn't know a lot of stories about how things were for me. And so it's okay to tell them later if you don't have the ability to tell them in the moment. As long as you both have the goodwill and you prioritize coming back together eventually.
And now a brief message from our sponsor. Did you know you can go to college tuition free just by being a team member at Chick-fil-A East Peoria? Yes, you heard that right. Free college education. All Chick-fil-A East Peoria team members in good standing are immediately eligible for a free college education through Point University. Point University is a fully accredited private Christian college located in West Point, Georgia. This online, self-paced program includes 13 associate's degrees, 17 bachelor's degrees, and 2 master's programs, including an MBA. College courses are fully transferable both in and out of this program. This could even be a great option to complete your general education courses and then transfer to the college of your choice and save money in the process. So if you're looking for an affordable college option while simultaneously gaining valuable work experience and earning an income, Chick-fil-A East Peoria is the place for you. You don't have to go into debt to get a great education. To apply today, please go to chickfila.com/East Peoria and click on the Career tab. You can also call the restaurant at 309-694-1044 to find out more. And if you aren't located near Chick-fil-A East Peoria, make sure you check with your local Chick-fil-A restaurant to see if they also participate in the Elevate program with Point University. Thanks for your sponsorship. Did you know that this podcast is 100% listener supported? We love producing free content that's available to everyone around the world with our monthly newsletters when you sign up for our email list and with our weekly episodes. We pray that this has been a benefit to you, that if any episode has ever impacted you, what we ask is that you will partner with us now and generously and prayerfully give financially before the end of the year. There's multiple ways to do this online at thesavvysauce.com. You can donate through Stripe or PayPal or Venmo with just a simple click. Or you can send snail mail to us at Savvy Sauce Charities, P.O. Box 101, Roanoke, Illinois 61561. We hope you choose to support us today. And during this season especially, it sounds like you really leaned into your friendships. So what would you say you've learned about community, both before and after your experience of launching Drew into space?
Well, I tell you what, I I realized that as an adult, often a lot of us don't really know how to do friendship well. And our culture is so values independence that we often convince ourselves that if we tell our friends or our community that we need help or just kind of show our true heart for how important it is to us, that somehow that's going to be kind of like devalued, or we're going to feel weak. And I realized, like, man, I wasted a lot of years trying to be tougher than I really am. And I wish I could go back and change that, because in this season, mainly because I had no choice. And so God really used this opportunity to show me, like, hey, I'm going to kind of like force you to open up your heart, be vulnerable with this small group of really trusted friends, and like, just trust me to see what happens next. And I did. And it was a game changer. I mean, I have a lot of deep feelings, but I put on a little bit of a tough exterior, and I forced myself to be super honest and super vulnerable with my friends and say things like, I'm lonely, or I don't even know what I need, but I'm just feeling exhausted or angry, or this is really frustrating to me, or I need help with this, and I don't even know where to begin, and just let those friends step into my life in a really intimate way. And, I think we've all had a friend at some point who has asked for help, and we have been so happy to help them. And we've never thought less of them for it. But somehow when it comes to our own time, we're like, oh, I don't want to trouble anybody. Oh, they're going to think I can't handle it. Or like, well, this is like, I made this bed, so I better lie in it. You chose to have all these kids. You chose this career. You chose this whatever. Like, this is your problem. But we would never say that about another friend. And so I don't know why we kind of are harder on ourselves than we are on our friends, because it's not right. Most of our friends are happy to help us. They love us, helping us, being with us, comforting us, supporting us. That's how they show how important you are to them. And we need to let them do that. I've also gotten better about verbalizing the feelings that I had always felt inside, but I felt awkward verbalizing, like, thank you for being my friend. Like, thank you for just spending this time with me, or you are an important person in my life. Words that we say to our kids, that we often say to our spouses, but sometimes, for me at least, felt weird saying to friends. And I'm really trying to get better about that. That was a great 9 months of practice. It doesn't come easy or natural, I think, to anybody, but it's a game changer. Like, why not tell your friends how much they mean to you? So community is essential. Like, don't try to lone wolf this life. I've certainly had some more extreme experiences than probably the average person, but the principles are the same. Get plugged into community and have multiple circles of community, certainly your faith community, but also, if you work, if you go to the gym, if you go to school, like your kids' friends, like there's so many circles of community, and don't be afraid to just jump right in and get connected. And you've got to do it before you are in crisis. You've got to kind of invest in these friendships so that you know them and can trust these friends, so that when those seasons come that are hard, you have this small group of people who you can rely on. It will be a complete game changer in your life when you have could be one person, could be two people, trusted people who can journey with you.
I could not agree more. And I really think that friendship is one of the most precious gifts we're given in this life. And going back to your marriage, we had discussed that time of separation, but then there was a whole other season of transition as well. So what was it like to come back together after being apart for nearly 10 months?
Yeah, so it's funny. There's always these Hollywood romanticized versions of what reunions must look like, whether that's a military deployment reunion or, when an astronaut comes home. And I think people assume it's some kind of like hot, sexy, romantic reunion. Like, oh my gosh, I gotta keep my hands off of you. But the reality is far different, right? Because maybe it is, maybe that's how it is for some people. I will just say, for us, when you've been living an independent life for however long, whether that was, a 6-month or an 8-month deployment or a 9-month deployment to outer space, I was living my own life fully independent for that long, where I made all the choices. I didn't have anybody looking over my shoulder, or, there's a little bit of independent freedom there when you're the only one kind of making the big decisions. And so when that person comes back into your life, which you want them to come back, you're happy they're home, but there is this awkward transition period. And it's definitely an opportunity for some tension, because now there's another opinion back in the mix, right? Like I had to kind of adjust my way of doing life for another person who had a valid opinion, another decision maker. The kids had to adjust to having another parent back in the house. You're kind of getting to know each other. So there is a little bit of a sniffing out period where you're like, hey, nice to meet you, because we all change. You could be gone from someone for a month. You're not the same person you were today as you were last year or 6 months ago, or maybe even a month ago. So anytime someone comes back in your life, they're different. You're a little different. You're like, my friendships had shifted over those 10 months. Like my work had shifted. Everything in my life had moved on, and he had not been there in the house with me to experience that. So it was a whole new set of experiences and a new person to get to know again. Now, he came home, and what made it a little bit more dramatic was that Drew came home in the startup of the pandemic. He came home in April of 2020, which at the time, I think we weren't sure. Are we going up? Are we coming down? Now looking back, we realized things were just ramping up. The world we were all still very confused about what's the best thing to do. Can we, all the things, So NASA pretty much brought him home, and then he came home to our house after just a few days in kind of the quarantine facility there on Johnson Space Center. But then he came back to our house, and then it's like he never left because all of the normal stuff that would happen when you come home from space, like travel and meetings and all of these kind of things, were all canceled or postponed. And so instead of kind of like getting to know each other slowly, it was like 0 to 60. I mean, he was home, and he didn't go anywhere. None of us could go anywhere. So we joke that the irony that he was in space with 5 professional crewmates in a small space, and then he came home to live in our small space with 5 amateur crewmates who are certainly not nearly as gracious or accommodating or helpful as the professional astronaut and cosmonaut crewmates he had. The irony is not lost on us. So he came home. I don't think we've ever spent that amount of time together, 24/7 in the same house with all 4 of our kids, no school, nowhere to go because everything's closed. And so, yeah, we're getting to know each other in this kind of petri dish of new experiences, as the world is also kind of like upside down and everything's unusual. So in the end, it was okay. I joke, like I was like, let me go do this puzzle. I just need some alone time, or I'm going for a walk around the neighborhood. Please don't text me. I'll be back when I'll be back. I just need a few minutes to myself. I think everybody has had that moment during the last 2 years where you're just like, I just need a few minutes alone, please. If you've been trapped in your house with somebody who you're not normally with 24/7.
Well, sure. And with your experience, mental health is very important for the family of the astronaut and the astronaut themselves. And wasn't it your psychologist who is saying, typically when you come back and enter this time of reentry and reuniting, you do little bit by little bit, because that tends to be wiser.
Yes, that's right. They call it titrating a return. And that's a principle they have in the military as well, which is they would normally come back from a deployment for at least the first couple weeks back from a long trip away. They would go to work every day for several hours, because it's, psychologically difficult for 2 people who have been living very independent lives to come back together just with like zero transition. The military has learned this over the last 20 years, that you could go from a combat zone to mowing your lawn in 24 hours. That's stressful, especially if you add in, marriage baggage, kids, nagging kids or issues like that, financial struggles. That's can be a breeding ground for some really difficult situations. So it's best to let people get to know each other again a little bit at a time, like you said. The normal return from space was kind of the same thing. It would be, come home and then you'd have some physical therapy. You'd have these different meetings, and it would be a little bit like going to work for several weeks while they're getting their body and everything back to normal. And then you kind of could have this kind of extended time at home, but it gave both people the ability to kind of like reintroduce themselves to each other in bits and pieces and just kind of ease into it. But we did not have that luxury. So we kind of had to create it ourselves. And I am glad, again, that we had those past experiences to know where the potential minefields were. If you were not prepared, you could be very disappointed if you went into it thinking, oh, they're going to come home. It's going to be like romantic. We're going to be like together and loving it all the time and just connecting so deeply. It's going to be amazing. It's going to be amazing. And then the first time that your spouse is like, why are you emptying the dishwasher like that? It's important to know, like, yeah, there is going to be tension. It is going to be awkward, and that's okay. That is part of the normal cycle, and it's going to be okay. But I'm glad that we had that knowledge beforehand because it could be tough.
Well, and Stacey, another reason that I really appreciate you being willing to let us enter your story with you is when we have different careers or we have someone in the military and a civilian who's not involved, there's so much room for assumptions and maybe not always assuming the best, and there's opportunity for miscommunication. So I'm just wondering about the person who's hearing this, and what if they're thinking, well, that sounds irresponsible or even selfish of Drew to choose this path if he's a husband and father. So how would you offer that kind of person another perspective that they might be missing?
I mean, I would say when it comes to for astronauts, for sure, these are not like hot rodding, thrill seeking people. In fact, I would say I think a lot of people make the assumption that people who do some of these higher, like physically higher risky jobs must be like thrill seeking, just throwing caution to the wind about everything in their life. And actually nothing could be farther from the truth. I think you would find that we certainly, and I think a lot of people in the same career field are similar, and that we are good risk calculators, and that like policemen, like firemen, like military personnel, it's an act of service to be in this job. These are not just like, space tourists or billionaires getting on a rocket for fun. These are professionals who have chosen a career field of service. And whether that is as a policeman, a fireman, a service to the nation, service to humanity, service to their community, and they all play a part in that. And I think most people recognize that it is, there's something to be said for the person who chooses a career that has a level of risk because they feel called to it, and because thank God for people who will take on risk and are willing to potentially sacrifice themselves for someone else. I mean, I think it's kind of a higher calling, which is why in general in our culture, we honor them, and rightfully so. It is risky. It's very risky. They certainly don't do it for the money. I don't think anybody in any kind of government service would say that they're doing it for the money. That's for sure. They're doing it because they feel called to something bigger than themselves and to serve their fellow man in some way. And that's certainly, I know how we feel as a family, that his choosing to transition as an Army physician into being still in the Army, but serving in this capacity was just the next level up in the way he could serve our community, our country, our nation, and all of humanity. And he really is, it's service first. It's not, it's the opposite of selfish. It is selfless service, really.
Thank you for that. I just say amen to everything you just said. And really, it's service from your entire family that requires a sacrifice from each of you, like you said, for the greater good. And I think something else that you pointed out so well in your book was that having this value more so of security, or not living into this calling that you said this calling was put upon your lives, that could actually be idolatry if you're starting to place a higher value on security or anything else other than God. And so I think you modeled that well.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I think a lot of people, sometimes these idols creep up on us. We don't realize that we have put something on a pedestal until it gets threatened to be taken away from us. And all of a sudden our reaction is over the top because you realize, gosh, I'm finding my security in this thing. I'm finding my identity in this thing, whether this thing is a job, another person, a political party, a scientific breakthrough, whatever it is, right? Like, and I think a lot of people, I certainly felt it, in that launch moment. Like, am I finding my identity in being married to this person or him having this job or this launch being successful? Because if I am, in about 10 seconds, my world may crumble because that could all be taken away from me. And I think we all kind of have probably had a moment, especially in the last 2 years, where for a lot of people, something that they have built their life on has been either taken away from them or it has been threatened to be taken away because of the pandemic. A job, a person in their life, a relationship, your kids going off to school every day. I mean, whatever it is that you've built in your life and you have put on this pedestal, and you kind of, maybe without even realizing it, have started to place more hope in those things remaining unchanged than you have in God. And all of a sudden, when those things are threatened, you have this over the top, emotionally fearful response. That's kind of an indicator, I think, to all of us. Like when we have that, is like, woo, my fear and my response should tell me that I seem to be very, very afraid that this is going to be taken away from me because I am putting too much hope in it. Instead, I should be taking that and putting it back where it belongs. I should reprioritize where I am finding my hope. And the only unchanging thing that we can build our foundation on is God. Everything else, every person, everything, every job, every whatever it is, can and could possibly be taken away from you. And on your deathbed will be. So, you can't help but have a little bit of self-reflection there.
Well, and then for all of us, how do you recommend that we all can rediscover our fun side when we've been trapped in survival mode for too long?
This is a great question because I think all of us have felt this definitely in the pandemic, this part in your life where everything in the world feels very chaotic. And so you try to regain some control in your own life by maybe regimenting your kids a little more, cleaning your house a little more, controlling things at work or whatever your environment is. And without really realizing it, you become this just like survival mode. Like your day just becomes about making things easier for yourself, streamlining things, making things just go, go, go. And you wake up one day and you were like, I'm exhausted. Like, why am I so tired? Why do I have like no joy? Why do I just feel unhappy? And you realize that you have not done anything other than just be like surviving and cleaning and doing work or whatever it is. Like you have just been doing the basics with no fun whatsoever. So I have been there. I hit that a bunch of times in the pandemic, but I certainly hit it when Drew was in space because it's really hard being a single parent and managing all of the emotional burdens and the logistics of it. And I realized that I was cleaning a lot. I was kind of getting a little bit more angry with kids or people who, were making me upset, because when you're in survival mode, it's all about just like, get out of my way. Let me do what I want to do. It's about getting things done quickly, and other people become an annoyance instead of a joy in your life. So it's all about going back to something that fills you up. And it can be something really frivolous. It can be something like it's 100% unique to you. And so I can't tell you what that thing is, but I would say the first step in kind of getting yourself out of survival mode and kind of getting back to your whole self is asking yourself the question, like, what do I enjoy? Not for its educational value, not for its good cardio exercise and not what your kids enjoy, not what is Instagram worthy or any of these things. Like in your soul, what fills you up? Is it reading? Is it watching movies? Is it riding bikes? Is it roller skating? Is it, eating Mexican food? Like, what is it that you enjoy doing that when you do it, you just feel like more of yourself, and then just go do it tomorrow? Like, it's going to take prioritizing time, probably some money, but that is as much of a part of who you are, how God created you. He didn't make you this like worker bot or like just a mom or just a wife or just a daughter or a sister. Like, he made you a whole person. And a huge part of who you are these things that you enjoy, and you cannot continue to pour into other people or work or your community if you are never getting filled up yourself. You will just dry out, you will be burnt out, you will be unhappy, and you'll actually be worse in all these other areas where you were trying to work hard, because you're just going to be like a shell of yourself. So for me, it was prioritizing time with friends. I got this crazy flyer on my front door for roller skating lessons. And I had this fantasy of being a really good roller skater that stemmed from like when I was 8. And so I signed my girls and I up for roller skating lessons, which was hilarious and very humbling, but it was just silly. It took time. We had to prioritize the time on every Saturday. It took money, but it was just fun. It had no educational value. My kids will look back on it and be like, what was that all about? I don't even know. But it was great because even in the midst of a stressful season, like that was a very stressful season, undeniable. But as part of that narrative, it will not only be like, yeah, it was really tough when my dad was away and, my mom had to like single parent us. But that was also the season where my mom took us to roller skating lessons. Isn't that weird? That was so weird. And we'll laugh about it. And so it's just about finding something that you want to do and then just unapologetically spend the money, spend the time, and invite a friend to do it with you. Again, doing something with a friend is always more fun than doing something alone. Don't feel like you have to justify it or explain it to everyone. You don't need to take pictures to post online. You don't need to tell it. Just go do it and have a good time. It's amazing how when you do that, suddenly like those dust bunnies or that email that had a weird tone that you got don't annoy you as much as they used to, because you're kind of like finding your whole self again.
That's helpful to remember to live life to the fullest and be ready for the next adventure that life's going to throw at us.
Yeah.
And just as a bonus, can we just ask, what are some of the most common questions that you and Drew answer about space?
Oh, that's a good question. A lot of like personal hygiene questions, teeth brushing, toilets, how do you, take showers or whatever. And of course the answer is they don't take showers. And then of course, a lot of people want to know, hey, I've always been interested in becoming an astronaut. How does somebody do that? And there are so many resources online. People, I say, look, go online, read all about it. There's amazing videos. NASA puts out an incredible amount of resources that you can read up on. But at the end of the day, do what you are most passionate about, because the likelihood that you or your nephew or your cousin or your coworker or your son or whoever it is that, is convinced they want to be an astronaut, the likelihood of them being an astronaut is very low. So you should do what just fills you up. Do a career and a life that you are passionate about. And if God calls you to that path, those doors will open. But if he doesn't, you'll still be living a life fully within God's purpose for you.
And Stacey, you're such an incredible communicator, both in this interview time together, but also really enjoyed your book. And so if people want to follow you to hear what you're up to next, where would you direct them online?
Sure. Well, they can go to my website, Stacey Morgan 2000. That's like StaceyMorgan2000.com. That has my blog, that has links to different podcasts like this that I've been on, and they can check that out. They can find me on Instagram, same handle, Stacey Morgan 2000. And, if people want to reach out, I love when people have been sending me messages lately after they've read the book. It's been so awesome. I tell people, like, I certainly didn't write this book for the money. I'm actually donating all of my book proceeds to charities that support military families. So I've been joking like, hey, read the book. If you don't like it, the worst that happened is you donated to a military charity. If you do like it, buy 10 copies and give one to all your friends. But if you do like it, I love when people send me messages and just tell me kind of like what resonated and how it spoke to them. That's just been one of the, I would say, the coolest aspect of completing this project, was kind of putting it out there and then getting to see how God uses it in people's lives.
There were so many things that resonated, but off the top of my head, if anybody has a copy of the book, they'll have to turn to the part about bologna on sale friends. That was yes. A personal favorite. And Stacey, you may know that we're called the Savvy Sauce because savvy is synonymous with practical knowledge. And so is my final question for you today. What is your savvy sauce?
Well, I'll piggyback off your bologna is on sale friends reference. And that would be pick up the phone and text your friend. We didn't need a study to show us this because I think most of us have just known this in our soul, but there is an endemic of loneliness in the world right now as we've got all these ways to connect, and yet people feel more disconnected. They feel more lonely, especially women. And what I learned through my own kind of relationship struggles over the years is that everyone's waiting for someone else to go first. That if in that moment you feel like you're the only person who's feeling lonely and alone, and that everybody else is in these friend circles and you're just somehow on the outside. But the reality is that pretty much everybody feels the same way you do, and everybody's sitting at home wishing someone would just text them and invite them to coffee. So that's my practical tip is don't wait, go first. Be the bold friend or even acquaintance. Like, it doesn't have to be someone that you are super besties with, but those baloney's on sale friends, like I said, you have to read the book and understand that that is like a special category of friendship. That's the kind of friendship that our soul longs for. But those things don't appear, like pop out of the ground. That kind of friend doesn't just show up. It's developed over time. It's invested in and cared for and loved. And it starts with literally a text to go get coffee. That's how every great friendship story begins. So if that's you, if you feel like, yeah, I don't have this close friend who I can do something with, I'm lonely. Okay, take that first step. Be the one who picks up the phone, send that text message to the woman from church or the woman from the gym or that friend you haven't talked to in a while, and just invite them over for coffee. Nothing fancy, nothing crazy. No agenda, just come over for a couple hours for coffee. Every single person I know who does this, no one ever regrets inviting a friend over for coffee. And that's the first step that we can all take into just feeling more connected and having those kind of friends that we want.
Love it. Well, Stacey, your book definitely changed my perspective on risk, and I was so hooked on all the stories that you shared. So I believe that your book is truly a gift to anyone who chooses to read it, and your faith is very inspiring. So thank you for sharing your journey with us, and thank you for being my guest.
Well, thank you. It's been great.
One more thing before you go. Have you heard the term gospel before? It simply means good news, and I want to share the best news with you. But it starts with the bad news. Every single one of us were born sinners, but Christ desires to rescue us from our sin, which is something we cannot do for ourselves. This means there is absolutely no chance we can make it to heaven on our own. So for you and for me, it means we deserve death, and we can never pay back the sacrifice we owe to be saved. We need a Savior. But God loved us so much, He made a way for His only Son to willingly die in our place as the perfect substitute. This gives us hope of life forever in right relationship with Him. That is good news. Jesus lived the perfect life we could never live and died in our place for our sin. This was God's plan to make a way to reconcile with us so that God can look at us and see Jesus. We can be covered and justified through the work Jesus finished if we choose to receive what He has done for us. Romans 10:9 says that if you confess with your mouth Jesus is Lord and believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, you will be saved. So would you pray with me now? Heavenly Father, thank you for sending Jesus to take our place. I pray someone today, right now, is touched and chooses to turn their life over to you. Will you clearly guide them and help them take their next step in faith to declare you as Lord of their life? We trust you to work and change lives now for eternity. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. If you prayed that prayer, you are declaring Him for me, so me for Him. You get the opportunity to live your life for Him. And at this podcast, we're called The Savvy Sauce for a reason. We want to give you practical tools to implement the knowledge you have learned. So you ready to get started? First, tell someone. Say it out loud. Get a Bible. The first day I made this decision, my parents took me to Barnes & Noble and let me choose my own Bible. I selected the Quest NIV Bible and I love it. You can start by reading the book of John. Also, get connected locally, which just means tell someone who's a part of a church in your community that you made a decision to follow Christ. I'm assuming they will be thrilled to talk with you about further steps, such as going to church and getting connected to other believers to encourage you. We want to celebrate with you too, so feel free to leave a comment for us here if you did make a decision to follow Christ. We also have show notes included where you can read scripture that describes this process. And finally, be encouraged. Luke 15:10 says, "In the same way, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents." The heavens are praising with you for your decision today. And if you've already received this good news, I pray you have someone to share it with. You are loved, and I look forward to meeting you here next time.